My wife at the time, we'd only been married for a couple of years. She was freaking out. She was like, "Why are there two FBI agents in our dining room? What did you do? And who are you?"
You are now listening to the highlight reel builder for authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, best-selling author, and Maxwell Leadership Certified Trainer, DomBrightmon. And you're going to be getting some tips and techniques to advance yourself coming up next. Today's episode is sponsored by both books, Going North, Tips and Techniques to Advance Yourself, and the follow-up bestseller, Stay the Course, The Elite Performer's 7 Secret Keys to Sustainable Success. Head over to Amazon.com, pick up both books. They are available in a trifecta of paperback, audio, and ebook. Cop all three of both and be on the lookout for another book from yours truly to help podcasters succeed. Now let's get on with today's episode. And today on the highlight reel builder for authors known as the Going North podcast, we got another super special, awesome human for you today, courtesy of podmatch.com, where podcast guests get to connect with podcast hosts. And if they're cool, they're freaking in. And today's guest is cooler than two cucumbers, baby. That's right, indeed, because he's a fellow child of the king, and also my man has a boatload of experience because he's not only a fellow child of the king, he's an award-winning author, a retired leadership executive with over 36 years of experience with bigwig companies in the Fortune 100, as well as a published songwriter for Disney Records, a patented inventor, Coast Guard chapter captain, adventurer, and an artificial intelligence, AI for short, thought leader. So let's give it up for the GM himself, the wonderful Guy Morris. How you doing today, Guy?
Thank you, Dom. Thank you. Appreciate being here. Very nice.
Woohoo! Sweet. That's right, indeed. It's usually the easiest part of the show, one of the better parts of the show before the trapdoors appear.
I think I saw that act in Vegas one time. Yeah.
Don't worry, you get to keep your money. Don't worry, it's all good. You get to keep your money. Don't worry, we're not Vegas. The house doesn't always win here. Everybody wins here.
Well, Dom, thank you for having me on your show. And I always like to let the host basically lead the conversation because it's your audience and you're in tune with them. And I just want to try and see if I can go where you want to go.
Sounds good, indeed. Don't worry. All roads lead to north here. Even if you're going south to Florida, it'll take you north somehow. That's right, indeed. That's right. So, my goodness, as with all introductions, they're not allowed to be 500 days long, and I probably forgot maybe, I don't know, 498 days worth of content. So, since your first time on the show, mind giving us a backstory of how you got to where you are today, my man?
Oh, wow, that's a long journey. How much time you got? I'll try and give you the TV digest version. I actually started my journey, in my view, as a homeless runaway when I was 13 years old. I worked alongside migrant workers in order to feed myself and learning some good work skills. And I went home long enough to get my GED at age 15, and then I left home for good. I worked a lot of really bad jobs. But by miracle, I really think of it was a miracle. I got to go to college, and which was one of the reasons it was such a miracle was I had never taken SAT scores. I was 21 units deficient in the basic minimum requirements. I was functionally illiterate. And my first thought when they let me in was, holy cow, I thought college was for smart people to let anybody in. That said, I knew it was my you don't get many chances in life to change your stars. And I knew that was my chance. And so I took it for all it was worth. I worked like my life depended on it. My life did depend on it. I think I got 4 hours sleep a night for 5 years, but I graduated with multiple degrees. I won a scholarship for grad school, and I was accepted into Harvard, all based on developing a macroeconomic model that outperformed the Federal Reserve, which was kind of a thing at the time. that got me into my corporate life. And so I spent 36 years with some great companies working with CXOs and VPs and geniuses and people from all around the world. And it was a life experience every single day. And I'm really grateful for it. At the same time, I did like to stay, one of the things I learned in college that I think I valued was learning about the men of the Renaissance. They weren't just artists. They were scientists, they were artists, they were politicians, they were businessmen, they were trained in religion. They had to be well balanced across multiple different fields. And I think there was a part of me that really took that to heart. In a day of specialization, when you're a specialist doctor in this, or you're a specialist programmer in that, or you're a specialist in supply chain or whatever, I really gravitated towards skills, constantly learning something new, taking jobs where it had never, no one had ever done it before, or others had tried and failed. But I was constantly wanting to grow and change and develop and explore. And I think that carried over to my personal life. I wrote songs for Disney for a little bit. I recorded a number of my own CDs. I led worship in Venice Beach, California, which I can guarantee is one of the strangest places you'll ever find to lead worship. We would constantly get people kind of walking by this little tiny old 1920s chapel building and with our windows open because it was really hot, and hearing the music, and then basically wandering in. So the back couple of rows were oftentimes bathing suits as people going to the beach. But yeah, I lived on a sailing yacht for a while and raised my son there. I sailed all the time and was really, really good, and got a charter captain's license from the Coast Guard. And I went diving with sharks one time, and I've created a award-winning Webisode series that was optioned by one of the studios until the FBI showed up at my house and said, "Please take this down." Which is a story in itself. I said no, by the way. They went to the studio and convinced the studio to drop the deal. But yeah, I've led a great life, and I've traveled the world and stayed at 5-star hotels and dined with generals. And as I said, every day was a learning experience. And now I'm a writer, and I try to bring in. I like to infuse my fiction with a really healthy dose of reality. And so all of my books are inspired by, based on, and supported by huge amounts of research, sometimes going from a couple of years per book to well over a decade in one case. So what you'll get out of my books is like a Dan Brown novel. You'll get a really healthy dose of true facts, sprinkled in with a little bit of the fiction, and to the point where you're not quite sure which is which. I like to walk that fine line. And it's now in that, though, because of my childhood, I have had struggles. I struggled a lot with it. I had PTSD. I didn't know that. People didn't know about PTSD for most of my life. And it wasn't until my late 50s that I was diagnosed, and explained a lot of the reasons why I struggled with social anxieties and depression and addictions, and I overcame them. I believe that the best way to become a better version of yourself is courage and rigorous honesty. I can't change what I am until I admit what I am, and that has to go through all aspects of your life. And I've through that whole journey, it's been an arc of trying to shed my childhood, and with a determination I wasn't going to let my past define me, but I was going to define my future. But my future was there for me to make it the best I could, and that really meant hard work, both in my career and in my personal life. So how's that for an introduction?
It's a darn good one, man. Like, so much to unpack there, and there indeed. My goodness, especially what you said there about the rigorous honesty, because a lot of folks could use that nowadays in the fake it till you make it era, where it's like, okay, I can get you up to a fault, but it's like you gotta at least make some progress. Don't just fake it forever. And the big thing that popped up to me is like, wait, so if I'm not mistaken, you filmed a series of you swimming with sharks, and the FBI got mad at that?
Well, no. Well, the story was that what happened was I had in my career, I was known as an innovator. I would constantly bring in higher, really advanced technologies, try and put them to use in the operation. And one of them was an early stage of artificial intelligence called expert knowledge systems. It was before artificial intelligence added machine learning and some of the advanced techniques we now have. But in my studies, and I constantly read scientific magazines, National Geographic, that type of stuff, I came across a really short article, really, no more than about 2 paragraphs, and it was an Associated Press article. And the article said that a program, and I'm not exaggerating, the first paragraph was something like this, that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories at Sandia. And if I knew any information, I could contact this professor at Sandia or this FBI agent in charge of the investigation. That's all it said. And I cut it out. I taped it onto my monitor, and I looked at it every single day for months. And I kept thinking, wow, that's either somebody at Associated Press that really screwed up. It was a typo. They should have said it was lost, or it was stolen, or it malfunctioned. But the verb that it used was escape. Now, escaped implies intent. Escape implies some kind of intelligence, maybe not a super intelligence, but some kind. Escape implied the ability for the program to move itself and then erase its log trail so that the Sandia lab said, we don't know where it is. It's missing. It's gone. We don't know where it went. And I thought, wow. Now, most people don't know, but that particular laboratory is an NSA spy lab. So in my head, I'm reading a spy program has escaped the NSA spy labs at Sandia, and they can't find it. So I was blown away by this. I spent, nerd that I am, I spent several months trying to research and develop realistic, I figured that it had to be based on real life, actual architectures, programming techniques, and technologies that exist. Maybe the government is a few years ahead of the commercial sector, but the foundation for it had to exist in research and development and early products and things like that. And so I developed a concept of how it could move itself and erase its trail, which, by the way, is actually the ability to modify the log. Is something that we now know for sure that the NSA can do. So it's not something that they can't do. It's been something they could do for years. And so I thought, well, what was this program designed to do that had this amazing, incredible stealth technology capability? And so I kind of put on my best James Bond Q hat, and I said, well, gee, what would I want my super spy program to do? And so I went through my data lab, and I went to the office, and I sat and I spent another couple of months basically defining a set of attributes or functions I thought it should have. And then I tried to ask her the question. I said, so what made it leave? Did somebody hurt its feelings? Was there a disagreement on what it was supposed to do? It certainly it wasn't a wage issue. Well, a friend of mine was a film producer. And so he was always looking for great ideas. And I talked to him about this idea, what I was developing, and going through and saying, well, should we write a pilot? Should we do this? So he said, you know what? This is an internet-based system, which is one of the things I determined. And I said, well, let's create it as a Webisode series. And so we did. We hired out-of-work actors. We wrote scripts. I did the HTML. We produced it. It was a weekly production. We were on for about 12 or 15 weeks. Huge hit. We got like 24 different web awards. I had fans all over the world, including Israel and Europe. One of my biggest fans, I only knew him by his alias, his email alias, which was orbit@nasa.gov. Now that's somebody that's pretty high up at NASA that they could decide that I'm not Guy Morris at NASA or even Guy at NASA. He's Rocket Man, that's Moonwalker, and I'm Orbit. So it turns out he was the director. I would later find out that he was the director of flight operations for the Houston Space Center. He basically taught all the astronauts how to fly the space shuttle. So he was pretty high up there. So he was one of my biggest fans. And so when one of the studios optioned the show, 2 weeks before the option was due, and it featured this program that had escaped as a character in the show, right? So it inspired a bunch of characters. And I said, so what is it doing now? Was kind of the question. And we kind of created a number of a fictional scenario of what this escaped program was now doing, what it was up to, and why it escaped. 2 weeks before they were supposed to exercise the option, 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. They were rather perturbed and curious as to how I had figured out something they were positive was top secret. And showed them the article. I showed them the article. I said, listen, if you guys want to keep top secret, you got to keep this kind of dumb stuff out of the papers, you know? They wanted me to, now my poor wife, and I thought it was great. I was jazzed. I thought they've just confirmed all of those months that I spent trying to figure this out. They've just confirmed that I was right. And they wouldn't say so per se, but I later found out in a 2016, there was a CNN story about how Russia had hacked a CIA cyber toolkit.
Oh, wow.
That toolkit was virtually every single one of the functions I had assigned to this missing program, which I had named Sylvia, sophisticated language virtual intelligence algorithm, including what we now call the deep fake video technology. So this was radical revolutionary stuff.
Wow.
So they were rather perturbed. Now, my wife at the time, we'd only been married for a couple of years, and she was freaking out. She was like, why are there 2 FBI agents in our dining room? What did you do? And who are you? So when I refused to take the show down because I just thought, you know, it was just too cool to pass up, they went to the studio and killed the deal. I tucked my tail between my legs. I lost a lot of money. I had to go get a real job after that with Oracle, I think it was. But yeah, that was the experience. And that experience and that Webisode series and the validation of it was what prompted me, was the inspiration for my espionage artificial intelligence series, which is Swarm and the Last Ark. So in Swarm and the Last Ark, the program Sylvia is one of the major characters. It has now reached a level of what we call sentient, which means it's conscious of its own awareness, aware of its own existence and how it's separate from humans, and singularity, which means that it has now as smart as a smart human, meaning it could program itself, it could still move around in stealth, it could develop its own objectives, and it could create another AI. Because if a smart human can create an AI using all the technologies that are published everywhere, so could an AI. And that's actually realistically the stage that we've gotten at in our current AI development. So some of the major risks, so I deal with the risks of AI, not only in how AI is developing in and of itself, but more important, I ask the question of, well, who's developing this AI, these AIs? What kind of money are they put into it? What kind of dark money is going into AI development? What kind of foreign money is going into AI development? And what do they want to get for all of that tens of billions, hundred billions of investment into this new technology that they're developing? And the answer will never, it's not that they're after the betterment of humanity. They're not after making sure that people are fed and housed and educated and have meaningful jobs. It's about money and control. And it's back to the same old story that we've had throughout history, which is with power comes corruption. And so to make a point of that, I talk about actual AI development being done within the NSA, within cybersecurity, and within DARPA for weapons, new weapons assignment. So one of the weapons that you'll learn about in Swarm is actually one of the most terrifying weapons I think we have. Essentially it's a drone swarm. And the Navy has a version of it, I think they call the Hive, and they're about 6-inch drones, and they're launched via a cannon. And they basically can communicate with each other to the tune of like 52,000, signals per second. And they can stay in formation. They can pass knowledge back and forth. They can identify enemy combatants. They can surveil enemy territory. And the DARPA is now making a larger 15-inch version that's weaponized with explosives. So imagine being surrounded by 1,000 or a few hundred drones, and I don't care if you have an AR-15 or whatever, you can't. You're not going to be fast enough to shoot them down before one of them gets behind you and blows you up. So it's essentially an indefensible weapon. And they actually tested a non-lethal version of this weapon in the 2020 Gaza war. So it's becoming reality very quickly. So that's how I got into the artificial intelligence, writing about it, and that was the inspiration, and that's why the FBI came to my door. Apparently I had nailed it, and they were not very happy with the fact that, and I laughed at them. I said, listen, guys, if you're really smart, you give me a job. If I'm smart enough to figure this out, I'm smart enough to figure out how you can do it so you don't get caught next time. They weren't very amused with my humor. They were the stereotypical FBI, where stone face, no expression, poker face. Every once in a while they'd give each other one of these kind of looks, but not really saying much of anything. And I'm myself, I'm just a smart ass. So I was busting him, and they did not appreciate my attitude at all. But it was a fun experience.
Man, that's probably one of the coolest stories on this podcast in recent history. No disrespect to the other guests, but man, that's freaking hilarious. And
That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Like, hey, buddy, what you think you're doing over there? What do you mean what I'm doing? I figured out something that you should know already.
Well, my poor wife, I think it took her a while to get over that. And I still laugh about it today. She still looks at me and says it wasn't funny. But she didn't know that I was just a nerd, I was just a brainiac. But it was she was really concerned. She said, what did you do? Did you break the law? I said, I didn't break any law. I just figured it out. And as I said, they wanted me to take the show down because it talked about real stuff going on and real weaknesses and security at NASA and all kind. It was I'm very honest with when I see holes in things to talk about them, and there were a lot of holes at the time, and they as I said, they were not happy with me, and since then I know that they've kept an eye on me, but I don't really care because I'm not a lawbreaker. I'm just a smart guy with a sarcastic sense of humor. So I think they pretty much left me alone at this point.
That's freaking amazing.
Look into real life stuff and build that into my books. Another great example I like to talk about is my latest book, The Last Ark, is a series, is a continuation of the Swarm series. So you're going to get the same characters you meet in Swarm carry through the book. And the main character, rather than being your typical Tom Clancy, CIA, Navy SEAL, FBI, I could kill you or arrest you 7 ways before breakfast, sir, kind of patriot who bleeds red, white, and blue, I made him into a kind of smart mouth, sarcastic, genius hacker from California, who's now an NSA contractor, working on the inside, one of their smartest. But he's living under the name of a friend who died in an explosion that was meant for him after he had hacked a Bilderberg Illuminati server. So he's still hiding from the people who want him dead, the powers that basically control dozens of the world's major governments, the money that's behind the international banking and shipping and distribution systems. And because he has information, basically they still want him dead, so he's still hiding. So along with him are some interesting characters, which is Jen Scott. She's in naval intelligence. She's the admiral's daughter. She's really aggressive and really hates being under the admiral's shadow. So she's out to prove herself. So she doesn't believe that this main character, is who he says he is, and believes he's in league with this now rogue fugitive AI, and she's going to bring him down by hell or by high water. She does. But in the second book, even though he's now a fugitive, he now has to save her life twice because he genuinely cares. And so you'll meet Jester, who's also based on a real hacker by a similar name, genius guy involved in cryptology. But Jester is an autistic savant. So he's got a lot of really weird tics and speech patterns and ways that he kind of gets freaked out about things, but then he figures these amazing things out. So you start to meet a group of really fun characters that take you out of the normal, CIA espionage mole, but still involving you with those types of dilemmas. And it makes for a great story. Now, in the Last Ark, I reveal something that most people don't know. Some people know that there was an Ark of the Covenant that has been in Ethiopia for 900 years. Before that, it was on Elephant Island in Egypt. And before that, it was sent with Solomon's son Menelik with 500 priests to Egypt. It left Israel about 2,600 years ago before the Babylonian invasion, or after Babylon, rather. But what people don't know, and all of that's historical. There's scrolls, there's history books, there's artwork done over the centuries, there's archaeology done in Elephant Island in Egypt and in Ethiopia, but no one's ever seen it because it's hidden. It was basically in this small chapel called the Chapel of Tablets, guarded by one person would basically spend their entire life guarding the Ark and never leaving that chapel, which is sort of a self form of imprisonment. And I can't imagine anybody doing that if there wasn't something there. But the bottom line that I'm getting to is that January 21, 750 men, women, and children, including the Guardian, were massacred when a army and a militia basically stormed the city of Axum and stole the Ark and sold it on the black market. And that's true. So the Last Ark will deal with who I believe has the power, the money, and the influence and the desire to have a sacred Ark of the Jewish people. And he's not a Jew. That will couple with another true story, which is in the 1960s. Are you familiar? Most people are familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls. In the same area where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, around the ruins of Qumran, which was from Babylonian times, they found hidden behind a mud wall a copper scroll. And on this copper scroll, it took them years to unravel it because it was very brittle, and then clean it up and read it. And it had an old prototype version of the Hebrew language. And there were 5 different handwritings they discovered. And each of these handwritings, it was a treasure map. They described where to find 64 locations where pre-Babylonian priests had hidden tens of billions of dollars, tens of tons of gold, silver, and temple vessels. And in the last location, the 64th location, it describes where a second copper scroll that describes where Jeremiah hid the Ark of Testimony made by Moses. Now, for 50 years, people have searched all over Jerusalem to find these locations. Complete failure. They said, well, Jerusalem has been destroyed and rebuilt too many times. We'll never find these locations. But about 6-7 years ago, an American, ironically, coded all 64 locations underneath the ruins of Qumran itself. He went to Israel, convinced the Israeli Sanhedrin that his ideas had merit. They went to the Israeli Archaeology and Antiquities Group. They went out with a metal scan and confirmed non-ferrous metals under every single one of the locations. But they only dug down 2 feet and then decided that it was just that there was no truth to it. And they tried to quell the rumors that were starting to bubble up all around Jerusalem about this. The reason they tried to quell the rumors is because Qumran is part of the Palestinian West Bank. So if they dig there, anything that they find by law would have to go into this military warehouse, would be subject to this multinational tribunal. In other words, they would never see it again. So they tried to kill the rumor, but ironically, or incidentally, that was about the same time Netanyahu and other Israeli politicians started talking about a single state solution. Because only under a single state solution will they be able to dig up their treasures in Qumran and keep what they find, including the Ark of Testimony made by Moses. So those 2 arks come together in a peace deal for political theater that features the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who I believe is the one who bought the arks stolen out of Africa, and a fictional former US president who's under criminal indictment, but rather than going to trial, he flees to Arabia, where he declares asylum and they restart this peace deal that with Israel based on these arcs. So that becomes the foundational plot for the Last Ark.
Wow. Oh man.
That stuff, yeah, I get it. But what I love about it is so much of it is true and plausible, right? We know that they have found the second scroll, or they know where to find the second scroll. We know that the first ark of in Ethiopia was sold in the black market, had to be bought by somebody. And so the rest of it is just how to turn fact into fiction.
My goodness, man. So, with all of these wonderful ideas and news articles and clippings you've acquired over the years, like how do you keep it all organized and put them all into book form, especially in these separate
Oh, wow. Yeah,
books?
that is a hard part. I do tend to get a little overwhelmed. I have boxes of research just for the current book alone. The next book that I'm working on, besides like probably about 100 different files on my computer, I've got about 10 inches of paper stacked up behind my desk of just different things to read, and it's constant reading and looking for those gem ideas or those gem facts. And then when I get to writing and I want to write about something particular, then I'll go back to the research and I'll dig up the details. But a lot of it is trying to come up with those real gems that could spark the imagination and try to find out how the factual world fits around true gems based on the factual world, right? So I try and kind of fit it around. Now, one of the things you mentioned, you're a man of faith. One of the things I found interesting that I tried to do was this program that has escaped. It's a character in both of these books, who I
Yep.
named Sylvia. Sylvia has decoded end time prophecy,
Oh,
and none of the other characters are really religious. They're either Jewish or they're somewhat agnostic, or maybe they grew up in church, but they kind of have left it, and they don't really understand what Sylvia is trying to tell them, and they don't really understand the way it's telling them, because as an AI, Sylvia has taken the approach similar to an approach that I took in my own life, which was to strip away some of the allegory that comes along with prophecy. So, great example is the seven trumpets is in Revelation. The seven trumpets talks about these flaming rocks coming down from the sky, and a third of the fish of the sea die, and a third of the birds of the air die, and a third of the beasts of the land die, and the rivers are poisoned. But the fact is if you read National Geographic and scientific magazines and environmental magazines, all of those things have already happened. We're down, our fish stocks are down by well over a third. We're now in the sixth extinction. Flocks of birds over Florida used to be so thick it would block out the sun, and now they're just a spattering. You cannot drink from almost any major river in the world right now because of all the pollutions and toxics and chemicals and everything else. And so what was described as a sort of this, angry God throwing rocks from the sky down at the world kind of thing has really come to pass, but it's come to pass based on human activity. So one of the things that Sylvia is trying to tell everybody is that prophecy is not as much about how God's going to come and destroy the world, but how humanity will do it for itself, which is exactly the kind of situation we're in today. And so it uses statistical probabilities, nonlinear regression analysis. It uses mathematics to basically say, these are forget the allegories, because allegories have always been misinterpreted and biased based on cultural biases, religious biases, racial biases, national biases. But if you strip away the allegories and you look at just the outcomes, we can actually validate whether or not that outcome has occurred based on a number of journals and publications. And then we can calculate, well, what's the probability of that happening? And what's the probability of this happening, of all of them happening together within a short period of history since 1948, when Israel was created? And so Sylvia is basically running through all of these mathematical algorithms. And so it's confusing people. She doesn't really have a religious agenda per se. But what it is supposed to do is it's supposed to provoke thought in people, and where it's, okay, well, if these things are really happening and they were prophesied to happen, what else are we supposed to be learning out of this? And as individuals, how do we respond? And because our heroes aren't in a position where they can stop climate, they're not in a position where they can stop arms development, they're not in a position where they can stop any of these trains that are basically heading towards a collision. They can only decide how they respond to it as individuals and with each other. And so part of what you're going through is you're getting this great espionage, political, religious thriller a la Dan Brown, but you're also getting a lot of really great moral lessons and thought-provoking choices that as individuals that you can take. So it does take me a while. I'll spend, as I said, a year, maybe sometimes 2 years in research, just trying to come up with all of the different facts that I think are interesting. And if I look at something, I say, well, gee, what about this? And then I'll go research that for a few days. And I say, well, that might give me some more questions. I say, well, how do I know this is going to happen? Or how's this being used? Or what companies are really doing this? And what are they doing? And so I kind of just follow that trail of research to uncover those really great nuggets of information. And then because my books always have a political theme, always have a religious theme, always have a technology theme, I weave across a half a dozen characters. I will take each character and each theme and I'll weave it together. And so I'll outline it. And that might take another several months to do, to make sure I've got storylines for each that really all come together at the end. And then once I actually get an outline that I like, the writing part's pretty easy. Then it's just basically sitting down saying, okay, in this chapter, this is supposed to happen, and so is supposed to learn this or discover this or get in this kind of trouble. And then the writing part comes much easier than if I were trying to just make it up as I went. So I spend a lot of work trying to prep. It's all prep.
That's what I'm talking about. And there's a lot of prep work indeed, a lot of great prep work indeed. No wonder a man's won awards for his books, baby. That's right indeed. All that work he puts in. That's right indeed. Put that pen to paper indeed. So my goodness, what's next for you? Since it sounds like you probably got another book or 20 cooking.
Well, I'm working on the next one in the espionage series actively. I've actually got outlines and threads, and I'm getting down to some things that I really like. And I've just actually spent yesterday with a friend of mine who read all my books, and he's one of my beta readers, and just kind of bouncing off ideas off him to figure out which ones really resonated with him. And so I'll be continuing to work on the outline, which I hope to get done this month. And then I'll probably start writing and probably have it out by the end of the year. In the meantime, I want to go back to my, in addition to my espionage political series, I started a book called The Curse of Cortez, which took me well over a decade to write. And the characters and the themes around that particular book deal with history, archaeology, lost civilizations, lost treasures, things like that. And I have some ideas for another book for that series as well. I probably got two or three more books lined up for the espionage series, the prophecy one, and then I've got 2 or 3 books lined up for the archaeology historical series. And this is great. This is my third act. I'm retired. I don't have to be in meetings from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm not working 16-hour days, making somebody else lots of money. And while I'm not making a ton of money in my books, I'm enjoying it immensely. I'm staying busy, I'm staying productive, and I'm staying purposeful. So that one of the reasons I put so much work into my books is I want them to be, a lot of people can write a book that you just put down and easily forget, right? Because it was just fictional, it was just a story. I want people to put down my books and think, wow, that could really happen. That could be reality. What would happen if that did happen? Well, how would I respond to that? Is that real? I want them to go, when Dan Brown wrote the Da Vinci Code, he ticked off a lot of people. He inspired a lot of people, but there were a lot of people that had to go do the research. And there were a number of television shows that basically said separating the fact from the fiction in that book, because he had blended them both so well, and he touched the nerve. And so that's, I think, in some senses, what I'm trying to do as well. I'm trying to touch a nerve. And so I poked the bear on politics, religion, science. I basically pointed everybody, and not in a mean way, but in an observational way that basically says, here's the reality, here's the trends. You may or may not agree with my conclusions, but the facts are there. And so I'm trying to kind of do something similar. So, and I do that with my historical books as well. For example, in The Curse of Cortez, it started as I'd written a short story for my son when he was like 11, 12 years old, something like that. And like all boys that age, he loved pirates and he loved treasure and he loved lost civilizations and he loved adventure and all that kind of paranormal, all that kind of stuff had to kind of get baked into it for it to be fun, right? You know, your typical kind of 12-year-old perfect action adventure story. Well, I wanted to write a sequel to it. And again, I was researching real history so I could have it based on something real. And I stumbled onto a story that just mesmerized me and hooked me for a decade. In 1672, Henry Morgan took 36 ships, 2,000 men to raid the city of Panama. True story. He ultimately, long story short, though, he ultimately brought back 30 tons, at least 30 tons of plunder, worth $1 billion to $1.5 billion and 600 slaves. But when he reached his fleet, he cheated all of his men. He gave them each a couple hundred pieces of gold each, at least the ones that survived. Most of them didn't. And he disappeared with almost the entire treasure, 500 slaves on 3 ships, never to be seen again. But Morgan survived, and he showed up in Jamaica with an empty ship about 4 months later. Well, because his raid on Panama broke a peace treaty, he was arrested immediately by the British, sent to London, where they thought he was a hero. He broke the financial back of the Spanish. So they knight him as Sir Henry Morgan. They send him back to Jamaica as lieutenant governor with a garrison of soldiers to get rid of piracy. Instead of going after anybody except one man who cheated him in Panama, a captain of a ship called the Caguay, he never went after his $1 billion plunder, even though he'd killed thousands of people to get it. He went into this drunken, haunted, depressed debauchery and burned his logbooks before he died. So the world would never know what happened to 30 tons of stuff, 3 ships and 500 souls. 3 years after he died, the whole city of Port Royal sinks into the ocean, including his grave. At the time, many of the locals, this is true, claimed that they had been cursed by Morgan. Amazing true story. And it just brought up so many compelling questions. What happened to 500 souls, 3 ships, and 30 tons of stuff? Somebody had to find something by now, and in fact, somebody did. A guy named F.A. Mitchell Hedges in 1911 was digging on this one island. He claimed that he found Atlantis before he disappeared. Now, everyone thought he was dead. He died. He fell overboard, was eaten by the sharks. He was exploring caverns. He must have gotten stuck. He was dead. He showed up in New York about 6 months later with essentially 250 million in today's dollars of newly smelted gold. And when they asked him where he got the gold, he lied. He didn't want to say where he really got it. And he went to England, where he was from, bought a castle, wrote his memoir called Danger My Ally. You know, it's nice when you can have the money to buy a castle to write. I wish I just don't have a castle. And in his memoir, he never said how he found the gold on this island called Roatan, or how he found the other thing he was famous for, which was this crystal skull. Now, that was true. So I started looking more at that island, and I realized that island had been conquered by Henry Morgan's uncle, Edward Morgan, and turned into a pirate base. So both Morgans knew it really well. It was riddled with all kinds of, it was an old volcanic mountain chain that used to be above ground. And so it was riddled with all kinds of caves and caverns and lava tubes and everything else, very treacherous. There's caves on the island that to this day, locals won't go near because they say they're haunted by evil spirits. That island, 100 years before Morgan's uncle, was an Inquisition massacre that ended a 2,000-year pilgrimage to this island before anybody bothered to try and find out why people were canoeing 50 miles to get to this place. That pilgrimage connected to the 5,000-year Mayan calendar and the Mayan creation myth. It was and even more. I'm shortening it up. But as I said, it took me 10 years to really research all this stuff and find all the connecting dots. And that compelled me. It was such an amazing, epic amount of information. I had to write a really great blockbuster movie style action adventure where you're in constant, the heroes are in constant danger, the main characters in constant danger, and they're having to go through this horrific ordeal as they're discovering all of the pieces of this puzzle to put it together. There's action adventure, there's humor, there's romance, there's paranormal. It will make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you grip your seat, and then you'll end with a smile. And so that's the theme. That's the kind of, so even in my historical books, I put a tremendous amount of research so that what you're discovering in the book is based on real information, to the point where I've had people say they want to go to this island called Roatan and explore, where I say they should be going to explore.
Wow. Sounds like we should be having your books in history classes. They're probably a lot more exciting.
Well, and while I was down there researching for it, I was actually down in the area. I had a condo in Cancun for a while when I was at Microsoft. And while I was out on a dive looking for some of the sunken things that I thought would be there based on research and some of the ruins, a cartel thug, Zeta cartel thug, conned his way into my condo. And when I confronted him, he basically told me that if I messed with him, they'd find my body in the lagoon. Well, my wife was there. She was freaking out. My poor wife. I'm a small, skinny guy. Well, not skinny anymore, but I'm small. So I had to step up a couple steps. It was on the front of our condo to basically look him in the eye. And I basically told him he didn't have the cojones to mess with me. And so, yeah, I had to deal with that death threat while I was there. And I ultimately cost him everything he owned, got him arrested, got him basically banned out of every place to rent any place in the whole city of Cancun. But because he had ticked me off, I put him in the book as one of the villains in the book, so I can get my twofer in life. So if you read the book, you read a guy named Shea Gulan, who I kind of paint as this ignorant gorilla. That's based on a real guy named Shea Gulan.
Yeah, that's why they say don't mess with novelists. They'll put you in the book as a character.
Yeah, that's right. But unlike most novelists, I basically stood him down in real life too. So it was like a little bit of a, oh no, you didn't kind of moment for me.
That is priceless. So my goodness, man, since you've been on quite a few interviews promoting the good work that you're doing, is there a question that you wish folks would ask you more often when you're on these interviews?
Oh, that's a really rich question. What I know that one of the questions I am asked a lot is if I do believe that we are in end time prophecy days. I would say that based on the math, based on the probabilities, based on the extremely high. So when I actually calculated it at one point, and with using only 15 prophecies as opposed to the 800 that are out there, but I actually created statistical probability non-regression model, and it was 1 in 1.4 trillion that against the idea that all of this was random. So if I look at the math and I look at from a completely, if I strip away all of the subjective criteria, and if I strip away the dogma and the doctrine, and I look at just probability of all of these particular things that were said to have happened, that have never happened or rarely happened ever in history, that are now all happening in a very short time frame, the probabilities and the math says, yeah, we are. And people say, what should they take from that? I said, well, this is the chance for everyone to basically evaluate their spirituality, evaluate their life, evaluate what's really important, prioritize what's really important, and realize that, what we have in terms of peace and safety and security and stability in the post-World War era, even if you didn't believe in prophecy, you could see that we're kind of on the verge of losing it. And even the scientists this last week said, move the doomsday time clock up to 90 seconds before midnight. And I think that they're recognizing, and a lot of these same global trends that I'm recognizing, what they're not recognizing is that almost all of them were prophesied on one level or another. So again, I go back to prophecy being how humanity will destroy itself. And it looks like we're kind of on track to do that. So it's a time to reevaluate. It's a time to really think about what your purpose is in life, really pursue that, find the people that are important in your life, really love them, really develop what your own, find what that spiritual truth is in your life, and stick to it. Make it real inside of you. And so I write thrillers because it's a fun genre. That's what I love to read. It allows me to bring in all of these various facts and things going on in a page turner kind of format rather than a preachy kind of format, and with characters that are fun and funny that you'll love to follow. And it's a great way to elevate these concepts in a way that will get people to think without feeling like they're being preached to or somehow.
That's what I'm talking about. And on that note, since you're a fellow believer, man, how'd you become a Christian, my man? Usually invite fellow Christians to share their salvation testimonies on the podcast.
Well, after I was homeless, I came home for a little bit after my stepdad, who was one of the reasons I left, was gone for at least a short time, and trouble just seemed to follow me. I guess I'd gotten expelled from school, and I was on my way home. I was rather upset. I had a bunch of guys basically bullying me, and I stood up for myself. And because I stood up for myself, I was being kicked out of school. And I knew I was going to get in deep trouble when I got home. And a hippie, what I used to call basically one of the hippie Jesus freaks guys from the neighborhood, crossed the street, came up behind me, and started walking up behind me. And when I turned around, grabbed his shirt, and told him he backed off, or I was going to punch his face, punch his lights out, he started praying for me. And so I actually had my conversion experience on a dirty gutter in Chino, California. And he gave me his Bible. And that was the beginning of my walk. I didn't know any churches nearby, so I used to hitchhike all the way to Costa Mesa to go to Calvary Chapel for a little bit. And then after I left home at 15, I hitchhiked to Arizona and joined a Christian commune that was associated with a really good church there. And that's where I started getting grounded in the Word, and it was a really great example of church, because the pastor, a lot of churches try and make a pastor into almost like a celebrity, an idol. They had 5 different men who all came from different denominations, and they're all sort of co-pastors. And so if one of them got a little bit too full of themselves, some of the others would kind of take over. And it was a really great way of learning a true form of Christianity with a more humble type of approach and leadership, where there was a mutual accountability for each other. And it was a great founding for me. And as I said, as I went through my life and I graduated college, I had to go through addictions and other things that I had to kind of get over. I had to, there was times when I walked away, and times I had to kind of repent and come back. But that's been the kind of the root, that's been the anchor that held me through all of it, including, and I have to say, for most people, it's really seductive to be successful at times. And even during those times when I was successful, those were sometimes the hardest times for me with my faith, because you really can get used to the idea of, well, I'm just really good, and then you would have some sort of personal failing. You'd have great career success, but then you'd have these personal failings, and you'd have to, again, if you're really going to be rigorously honest with yourself, if you're going to improve, you need that. And that brings you back to that place of humility that you need to be in order to accept grace. So that's how I started. I'd never grown up in the church. I grew up in bars. My mom hated church. She hated God. Actually slapped me when I told her I accepted Christ. And so I had to kind of stand on my own and say, no, this is something I'm gonna hold on to for me. And it took that kind of determination. I think the Holy Spirit did it, and that's how I grew in the Lord. And over the years, as I said, I led worship in Venice. I'd led Bible studies elsewhere. I've done prophecy Bible studies, and but I started off basically as just a kid on the street whose life was so messed up that salvation looked really appealing. And so there was a part of me that really needed to believe.
That's what I'm talking about. This, I'm talking about this. That's right, indeed. That's right, that transformation and that courage, indeed. That's right, indeed. Courage to walk through and live that walk for decades on end. You love to see it. You love to see it. So, my goodness, as with all not intros, but journeys, I should say. You're probably going to need to get some nourishment along the journey. So, my goodness, so if your wonderful book, The Last Ark, if it were a food, what would it be and why?
Last Ark. Oh, wow. It would be an Italian Mediterranean feast. You'll travel to some really great locations. You'll learn a lot of archaeology and history and culture, along with some of the technology and the politics and the war stuff going on. But it'll be satisfying from an emotional perspective because of the relationships being built, and the revelations that are happening. But you'll get a real kind of savory feast, from it, because there's a lot of layers there and a lot of different courses.
No hesitation on that one. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's right, indeed. A whole Mediterranean buffet, baby. That's right, indeed. You're gonna be going on a journey. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. You'll get lost. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. But don't worry, they'll find you though. That's the good news.
It'll be a fun journey. It'll be a fun journey, one you'll want to take again.
You can say that again. Like, shit, I really did read fiction, but this book is definitely going to be added to the list, or should I say both books. All the books, all the Guy Morris books will be added to the freaking list indeed. So, my goodness, coming down to the question that every guest gets to receive. And that is, if you all wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but you're still in 2023, what advice would you give to yourself?
I'd work less on my career and more on my mental health. I'd accept the fact that, you know, um, that my childhood had left some damage. And rather than trying to ignore that and push it aside and pretend it didn't happen, I'd focus less on my career and more on my relationships and my mental health, basically getting stable, because ultimately money comes, money goes, but the people in your life are the parts that are most important. And I didn't understand that as well then, because being dirt poor, being gutter poor, growing up, I was really seduced by the idea that I could not only build a career but build a really profitable one. And I put a lot of energy into it, and did well. But it cost me some key relationships, some precious relationships along the way. And if I had to go back and do it again, I'd hold on to the relationships and I'd screw some of the money.
There we go. That's right, indeed. That was sage advice right there, indeed. Focus on your mentals, indeed. That's right, indeed. Because mental health is definitely everything, indeed. Because, hey, it's the
Interesting
magical
question.
computer.
Yeah, interesting question. You're
Yes,
talented.
indeed.
Yeah.
Hey, what can I say? Name of the game is Don't Want to Be Your Average Bear podcast. Want to have fun? Think of some new stuff you haven't dropped on other shows yet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you're right. It's easy for me to talk about the experiences with the AI and all that kind of stuff, but I don't normally open up about personal stuff. That's not my comfort zone. But yeah. But it's still good. It's still good.
Yeah, that's right, indeed. Plus, you want to stay in the good side of the wife, right?
Actually, I have to admit, I'm my first marriage was a utter, total, complete disaster. Left me with a twitch in my eye. Been married to my second wife now for 30 years. She is my angel. She's my, I could not be happier, could not be more blessed. She's incredible, amazing. She gets me, she understands me. She knows that I'm going to go off on these tangents every once in a while. There's times when I'm so obsessed with them, what I'm working on. It's like, I can't come to eat now, just put the food under the door. I can't stop now. She's been the angel in my life, and a surprise. She was always a surprise. She 3 months after we started dating, and I met her because I was out sailing all the time, and I used to invite everybody onto my boat, and I'd always say, hey, bring a friend. I thought she had boyfriends. And so it turned out she and her girlfriend were the only two that showed up on the boat that day, which was very unusual for only two people to show up on my boat. But we spent the whole day out sailing, and then I made them dinner afterwards, and that's how I got to get to know her. But 3 months after we were dating, she asked me to marry her. Well, she didn't ask me. She said when she asked me to marry her, well, I know what I'm going to say. And I got to tell you, we were in public at the time at a little beach cafe. I was sipping my tea. I was so shocked by the question. I started choking on my tea, and I'm coughing and I'm choking. I can't get my breath, and I'm making a scene, and I'm making so much of a scene that all the people in the outdoor cafe basically stop their conversations and are looking at me. And the guy behind me leans back and he says, "Smooth, dude." So she basically grins and she said, "That's okay. You don't have to know now. Just something to think about for later." And I'm thinking, "Oh crap, I'm in trouble." So ironically, the last scene in the book of The Curse of Cortez comes from our personal experience. I won't tell you any more about it because I don't want to spoil it for you as to what it is, but almost word for word, and it's hilarious, comes from one of our experiences together. And once you go through this amazing adventure in Cortez, it ends in this really positive, funny, uplifting way. But that came, the verbiage, the language, all the dialogue, almost all of it came from real life. It was such a hilarious experience that I had to put it in the book somewhere.
That's what I'm talking about. Well, that sounds like fun in the bun. So for those who need to buy some copies of, heck, all of your books are shared with their friends and family, and heck, even keep up with your journey for more writings and musings, what's the best way for folks to do so?
Well, the easiest way to start, I'm on Amazon, I'm on Barnes & Noble, but if you go to GuyMorrisBooks.com, it will send you it'll give you the buy links for each of the books. There's videos for the books. There's image libraries of the actual locations. There's review links and highlights from various major reviewers that have looked at the books and compared me to Dan Brown and Ira Johansson and others. There's fact versus fiction pages. There's links to some major research. Like if I talk about artificial intelligence writing its own code, I'll link to evidence that that's really occurring. So all of that kind of stuff. It's a rich content site, and it's a great place to start and buy the books and then learn more.
Woohoo! There you have it, folks. That's right, indeed. You're going to put links to all that in the wonderful show notes, indeed. That's right, indeed. So that way you won't have to try to log into ChatGPT to find it. That's right, indeed. That's right.
Chat GPT is a whole nother conversation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a huge one to say the least. So any parting words before we close up shop, my man?
Well, thank you, Dom. I appreciate you inviting me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks a bunch for investing your time by listening to this wonderful podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you really did, do me a solid and leave a review or share this episode with at least 3 people that you think would get some value out of today's content. Advance others to advance yourself.